When talking to people from abroad about Crimea, I'm often shocked by the deceptive impressions and dubious conclusions about my homeland. Most of these people probably hadn't heard of the peninsula before the occupation, but that doesn't stop them from forming opinions about Crimea. Unfortunately, most of them are based on the myths of Russia propaganda. If these beliefs had remained in the minds of individual Russophiles, I wouldn't have made this video. They are, however, represented on a much larger scale by media or celebrities. You can even see them in textbooks, like in this one, where the beginning of the occupation is described according to the Kremlin's playbook. The image of peace, returning home, and friendship between peoples is being portrayed there. All of this is part of the Russian propaganda strategy, the myth of the democratic annexation of the peninsula. In this video, I want to debunk 3 of the most popular myths I have heard from foreigners and also explain why Crimea was not, is not, and will not be a part of Russia, and also isn't happy in the occupation, contrary to the picture Russia is trying to show you. You are watching Lina from Crimea. I was born there and lived most of my life in Ukrainian Crimean Tatar family. Let's go. The first myth is there are a lot of Russians in Crimea and they have a right to become a part of Russia. Let's take a brief look at the history. Russia began changing the ethnic composition of Crimea even before the occupation. Since the first annexation of Crimea by the Russian Empire in 1783, the indigenous peoples faced several waves of immigration due to the untenable conditions created by the Russian Empire. Russian troops later deported Greeks and Armenians from Crimea under the pretext of protecting Christians. Apparently, they lacked it so much that later, during the Second World War, they deported Crimea Germans, Greeks, Bulgarians, Armenians, Jews, Italians, Romani, and other peoples in order to settle Crimea with the Russians and to spread the myth that no one else had lived in Crimea except them. Even during the Soviet period, the census recorded Orthodox Slavic Ukrainians in Crimea as Russians to support this myth. And I'm not even touching on the deliberate destruction, aka genocide, of one of the indigenous peoples of Crimea, Crimean Tatars. The entire population was deported to remote territories in the Soviet republics of Central Asia and Russia. At the same time, Russians were brought into the same houses. It's literally this picture. The tactic was simple: replace everyone. At the beginning of the 18th century, Crimean Tatars made up 95% of population of Crimea. By the time of the deportation in 1944, they were already less than 25%, and now it ranges from 10 to 20%. In the aftermath of the deportation, consistent Russification of the region and the ban on returning home for almost 50 years, Crimean Tatars have become a minority with a dying language in their own land. However, this is a topic of another video. So it is precisely these imported Russians, calling themselves indigenous after only a couple of generations, who are the main proponents of the lies about Russian Crimea. You may have seen these people in videos of pro-Russian rallies in Crimea, in addition to Russian citizens recently brought in from Russian Federation. But it is important to realize that their cultural identity is not a basis for changing the borders of Ukraine. They may be surprised, but there is already a whole country dedicated to protecting Russians, even though it's not doing a very good job. If people who became Ukrainian citizens after the restoration of Ukraine's independence want to live in Russia, they can pack their bags and take the first train there.
Мы очень хотели вернуться в Россию, так что мы себя здесь неважно чувствовали при Украине. Они не заботились о нас как надо. А Путин молодец.
Jokes aside, the number of people brainwashed by propaganda, Russophiles, all those nostalgic for their use in Soviet Crimea, shouldn't affect if Russia has the right to occupy the territory of another state. Besides, life in Crimea wasn't exactly uncomfortable for Russians before 2014. Education in Russian, state services in Russian, local television in Russian, and the ability to easily connect to Russian TV channels were all available. There were no objective reasons to want to go to Russia. Those who really wanted to were already there. Second myth, Crimea has always been a part of Russia. And I can't believe I have to explain this one. The indigenous peoples of Crimea have no connection to Russia and first encountered it as fully formed independent nations. Crimea has never been Russian, neither mentally nor historically. Ask yourself another question. Was it occupied? Of course. And what do empires do with the colonies? Erase their identity. The point is, Russia destroys everything it can't capture. Russia occupied the peninsula in 1783, but could not turn the Crimean Tatars into its lapdogs. Therefore, it destroyed them, along with their language and culture. Today, the Crimean Tatar language is recognized as severely endangered, and the majority of population speaks Russian. This is a very monolithic picture. Has Russia achieved the illusion that Crimea has always been a part of it because everyone speaks the same language? Yes. After the occupation of Crimea in 18th century, Russia began the memory of Crimean Tatars from map of Crimea. Initially, Crimean Tatar toponyms were replaced with Greek ones by decree of Catherine II. Akhmedjit became Simferopol, Kislev, Yevpatoria, Akyar, Sevastopol. Here is another perfect example. In the 18th century, the Russians came up with an excuse to conquer the city of Kefe, claiming it was a dam of Turkish Tatar bandits who oppressed the Christian population. However, in 1736, the city had 21 Armenian churches, 1 monastery, 5 Greek churches, and 32 mosques. When the Russians arrived in Crimea with their great culture, the city was left in ruins, and the local population were either deported or massacred. The empty city was renamed Feodosia and resettled primarily by people from outside Crimea. By 1897, approximately half of the city's population were Russians. Almost all the historical monuments were left in a beautiful state. After the deportation of 1944, Crimea was littered with Soviet toponyms aimed at instilling a Soviet perspective in those who would inhabit the peninsula. Instead of Crimean Tatar names, new ones appeared in honor of mass murders and killers of the Stalinist regime, the Red Army, and May Day. Some of the new names seem benign at first glance, but the goal was still to erase the memory of Crimean Tatar culture. For example, the town of Seytler, named after the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, was renamed Nizhny Gorsky, literally of the lower mountains. It's both funny and sad that the town is located in the middle of the steppe and there is not a single mountain in the vicinity. There are numerous examples like this one, and so we get the argument that since all the place names in Crimea are Russian, it means no one other than Russians has ever lived in Crimea. Has Russia succeeded in creating this illusion? Yes. Those who push the narrative about Russian Crimea choose to ignore the other perspective on the beginning of the occupation, Crimeans who were against it and spoke out with the pro-Ukrainian position. Do you see them now? Not much, because any pro-Ukrainian, pro-Crimean Tatar or anti-Russian slogan in Crimea now puts a person in danger. Has Russia achieved the illusion that everyone in Russian-occupied Crimea is satisfied? Yes. There are too many examples to name them all. The main conclusion is that if you have come to believe that Crimea has always been a part of Russia, then Russian propaganda has succeeded. The third myth is Crimea is not Ukraine because no one there speaks Ukrainian.
No, God! Зачем мне рисковать? Я украинка, я этого не стеснялась никогда. Я уроженка Симферополя. А что мне делать еще?
There are indeed few Ukrainian speakers in Crimea. However, language doesn't determine national identity or citizenship. If you think otherwise, you are making the same mistake that Putin did when he thought the entire Russian-speaking population of Ukraine would welcome his invasion with open arms. If language really was the deciding factor, his plan would have worked. Just like all people throughout the Soviet Union, Crimeans were forced to use Russian to obtain tolerable living conditions, regardless of ethnicity. Even my deported relatives, a Crimean Tatar family living in Uzbekistan, had to learn Russian as their native language, even though it's not native to Crimea or Uzbekistan. Similarly, many Ukrainian-speaking people in Crimea eventually started speaking Surzhyk or Russian. According to Article 18, Section 17 of its own constitution, the Autonomous Republic of Crimea has the right and responsibility of conducting education in 3 official languages: Ukrainian, Crimean Tatar, and of course Russian. In practice, Russian dominated their educational system. It sounds too horrible to imagine, but this is a kind of oppression that Russian speakers had to endure before reuniting the Russian. Even considering all this, Ukrainian can still be heard in Crimea, even though it's not common. Ukrainian-speaking people have been living in ethnic Ukrainian settlements in Crimea for centuries, but unfortunately, it's typical in Crimea for a child to speak their native language fluently until the age of 6-7, but then switch to Russian when they go to school. Ukrainian was still taught in Crimean schools, and there were several schools and classes with fully Ukrainian instruction. Crimean children were always represented in Ukrainian language and literature competitions and participated in local contests related to Ukrainian themes. Ukrainian culture was ingrained in every Crimean to varying degrees through television, pop culture, and school programs. Ukrainian is still understood and used when necessary. Typically, Russian settlers or people brainwashed by propaganda reacted negatively to any use of Ukrainian in media or even in daily life. For example, when I spoke Ukrainian to a store clerk in Simferopol back in 2008, they asked me if I got hit on the head. A Ukrainian in Ukraine. Think about it. I hope I was able to explain to you that if you spread the myths mentioned in this video, then you're playing into the hands of a state that only knows how to destroy and kill everything it couldn't conquer. Thank you for your support. Please continue to donate Ukrainian verified funds. The links will be in the description, as well as the links to interesting projects about Crimea. Stay tuned for more videos. I'll be happy to tell you more about Crimea. Bye.